72 hours after walking off center court in tears, Eala didn't go home to process it. She got on a plane and flew straight into one of the deepest fields a WTA 500 event has assembled in years. This is not a rest week. This is Chapter 2. If you've been on this journey since Miami, since Madrid, since Berlin, you already know exactly why this channel exists. Subscribe and let's get into what she's actually walking into this week. Let's rewind 4 days first, because the turnaround here is genuinely fast. On July 6th, Eala lost in the Wimbledon Round of 16 in 3 sets, the deepest any Filipina has ever gone at a Grand Slam in the Open era. Reports described her leaving center court to a standing ovation despite the loss. The next day, she posted a short, simple message of thanks on Instagram. Nothing more. By the following Wednesday, she was in Washington warming up for a tournament that started counting down almost immediately. And this isn't a soft landing spot. On paper, it's labeled a WTA 500, but the actual field playing inside it looks a lot closer to a top-tier event. According to the tournament's own release, 7 of the world's top 20 are entered. Elena Svitolina, the same player Eala beat in Berlin a few weeks back, now with an obvious motive to return the favor. Marta Kostyuk, a past finalist at this exact event. Naomi Osaka, a 2-time Grand Slam champion still working her way back toward her old level. Venus Williams, still commanding attention at 46 years old. And Leylah Fernandez, the defending champion, the player who actually lifted this trophy last year. That's not a gentle re-entry point after a Grand Slam run. That's a legitimate gauntlet. Then there's the timing question hanging over all of it. A year ago in Cincinnati, fatigue from a packed back-to-back schedule caught up with her, and tennis fans who follow her closely remember exactly how that went. So there's a real question being asked quietly around the tour right now. Can a 21-year-old genuinely peak on grass at a Grand Slam and then turn around and peak again on North American hard courts inside 3 weeks? Historically, the answer to that question has usually been no, but this entire season has mostly been Eala rewriting what history says is possible for her. Start with what's actually on the line financially, because the number is bigger than people realize. The total women's prize pool in DC sits north of $1.6 million once you factor everything in. For a player who was ranked outside the top 140 in the world just 12 months ago, that's not a nice payday. That's a completely different tax bracket than the one she was competing in a year ago. And she didn't get handed a spot here either. The tournament confirmed 20 direct main draw entries, and she's one of them. No wildcard, no favor. Some outlets initially got this wrong and reported it as a wildcard entry, but the tournament's own release corrected that. Her ranking alone, sitting at 32 and about to climb further once Wimbledon points land, earned her that seat at the table, and it's worth actually walking through how she earned that ranking jump, because June alone was an absurd month for her. On June 17th in Berlin, she beat world number 10 Elena Rybakina in straight sets. The very next day, she beat Elena Svitolina, also in straight sets, a Wimbledon champion and multiple-time Grand Slam semifinalist, beaten back-to-back on grass. On the surface, those two are supposed to dominate. Then at Wimbledon itself, on July 4th, she faced defending champion Iga Swiatek in the round of 32 and won again, her second career win over Swiatek. You don't beat a player like that at Wimbledon by accident. You beat her because you genuinely belong on that court. And after that match, she said something in her press conference that spread fast across Filipino social media, a simple line about the court not being a place to shrink yourself. That's not just a nice quote for a highlight reel. That's a specific mental shift her coaching team has reportedly been working on with her for months. There's also a clear pattern building around her travel schedule that Washington fits right into. Viral airport welcome scenes in Madrid. The same thing in Paris. A documented crowd scene at a smaller event in Bad Homburg that circulated widely on Filipino social media. Feature coverage out of Wimbledon specifically focused on the size and intensity of her Filipino support at the grounds. Washington isn't breaking that pattern. It's the next obvious stop on it, and the DC metro area happens to have one of the densest Filipino-American populations anywhere in the country. If her recent stops are any indication, those fence lines were already filling up before she even stepped on court for practice. There's a specific name behind a lot of what's happening with her development right now, and it's worth naming clearly. Tony Nadal, the coach who guided Rafael Nadal to 22 Grand Slam titles, one of the most respected minds in the sport's modern history, and the head of the academy in Mallorca where Eala has trained since she was 13. Multiple tennis outlets have reported that Tony has taken on a genuinely hands-on mentoring role in her development this year, and Eala herself has spoken about it directly, describing him as someone who's told her things she didn't want to hear but needed to. That's not a passing compliment from a legend making a courtesy stop. That's a signal about where Tony Nadal is choosing to invest his time and reputation. And according to separate reporting, Rafael Nadal himself has reportedly been involved in advising her tactically this season, working through her head coach. Rafael Nadal doesn't spend his attention on players he doesn't think are going to matter. Look at what's actually sitting on the other side of this fortnight, because DC isn't a standalone event in her calendar. The National Bank Open in Montreal comes next, then Cincinnati in August, then the US Open in New York starting August 24th. This isn't one tournament. This is a runway, and if it plays out the way the last few months suggest it could, it's a runway that ends with her inside the WTA's top 20 for the first time in Philippine tennis history. And there's a reason it's specifically Washington that opens that runway. The Philippine Embassy sits just blocks from the tennis center. This is arguably the most diplomatically significant American city for a Filipino athlete to be competing in publicly. In a very literal sense, she's not just a tennis player walking onto a practice court this week. She's a 21-year-old from Manila carrying a national identity through the political capital of the country, with arguably the most influential Filipino diaspora on earth. And this isn't happening in isolation from the business side of tennis either. The WTA's overall prize pool has grown double digits year over year, and part of that growth is directly tied to tournaments like this one becoming more commercially valuable precisely because players like Eala are pulling in audiences the tour never used to have real access to. Every fence line packed with fans, every jersey in the crowd is part of why the money attached to these events keeps climbing. If she reaches the semifinals here, she's projected to be a top 25 player before Montreal even starts. If she wins the whole thing, this stops being a feel-good storyline and becomes a legitimate career trajectory. There is one thing keeping this from reading like a guaranteed coronation story, and it's worth being honest about it. She lost her last match. 3 sets, center court, the biggest stage of her career so far, and she had a lead in the second set that she couldn't hold on to in the third. Plenty of players would take a full week to process a loss like that. Some go home entirely. Eala posted a short thank you message and was on a flight west within 48 hours. That tells you something about her without needing much extra commentary. Run back through the month one more time. Rybakina beaten in straight sets. Svitolina beaten in straight sets. A real battle with Swiatek at Wimbledon that she came out on top of. A widely shared moment of her taking a call with her father courtside in Berlin, not trying to hide it from cameras. A standing ovation on center court despite a loss. A short, simple message of thanks that a massive Filipino audience read as something closer to a prayer of gratitude. And now, boots on the ground in Washington inside one of the toughest fields a WTA 500 has assembled in recent memory as a direct entrant on merit alone. The player who landed in DC this week is not the same player who showed up in Miami as a qualifier 18 months ago. She's the player Tony Nadal has chosen to personally invest in. She's the player who's now beaten Swiatek on grass. She's the player an entire diaspora community has been waiting years to show up for. So here's the real question. Does she reach the semifinals in Washington, or does the fatigue from Wimbledon catch up with her early against a top 20 seed? Drop your prediction below and tell us what draw you're hoping to see her get. If you've been tracking this since Miami, since Madrid, since Berlin, you already know this is where the real fan base gathers. Subscribe and stay with us, because Washington is only chapter 1 of a 3-tournament run. DC, Montreal, Cincinnati, and every result, every crowd scene, every ranking shift between here and Flushing Meadows is going to get broken down on this channel first.